Hey there, campers. So I've started doing these videos, 90% for myself, just to talk about things I have feelings about. One of the things I have a lot of feelings about, not all of them good, is the recent movie Supergirl. So I'm going to be doing not just a Supergirl review, but of course I'm going to do four things in this video. One is I'm going to give you like the quick up or down, did I like the movie or not, superficial review, which I'll keep you in suspense there, which I'll say in a second, and that should be very quick. And then I'm going to have to talk about the conversation around the movie, which is the more depressing part. And then I'm going to talk about my personal history with the character, and then I'm going to get more in-depth into the film. So those four things, hopefully it's less than 40 minutes or an hour. God knows how long it's going to be. I'm just going to babble, because I'm a babbler. So the first thing, is it a good movie? Yes, I'm going to say yes, even though, especially after having seen it twice, I liked it better the second time. But it's very much, it's like my thumb is here. It's like it's not quite up. It's definitely not down. It's I wouldn't say mediocre. Maybe it's a little better than mediocre, but it's borderline good. So obviously it's not great. It's far from great, and unfortunately, the thing is with the internet instant gratification culture that we have, everything has to be either a stunning, brilliant, epic masterpiece, or it has to be complete garbage. And Supergirl is neither of those things, but because it is obviously not the first, people are going to say it's the second. People are going to say it's garbage, and it's not. It's a good effort with a lot of good things going for it, but unfortunately, there's no room for okay in today's media sphere, and that's unfortunately probably why that's why movies are kind of dying, and why superhero movies and blockbusters are particularly dying, because they cost about at least $200 million to make, and another $100 million to market, and then they have to instantly catch on. I mean, they have to be successful before they even come out, because it's before they even come out, people make up their mind about what the movie is going to be, and people made up their mind that this was going to be bad beforehand, and it's a shame, but that's kind of the world we're in. But I think blockbusters in general are going to have a really hard time. I mean, we're not superhero movies in general are dying. If not, they're on life. The genre is on life support, unfortunately, and it's partially because of this attitude. And Supergirl in particular, I'm going to say it had two separate but equally important groups. I'm going to say separate but overlapping hate groups. I don't want to say the Snyder fans are a hate group. They're not like the KKK. But the Snyder fans are they hate everything that has to do with the new DC producer James Gunn. And even though James Gunn did not write or direct this movie, he produced it. I'm a fan of Gunn, but this is clearly the first. It's the first big misstep for me. I thought the Superman movie last year was great, and I thought the introduction of Supergirl in that movie made me excited for it. And unfortunately, the movie had to be a hit. The second one had to be like really strong for the sake of that universe, and unfortunately, it was not. But yeah, the Snyder fans are relentless in their hatred for everything Gunn touches. They decide in advance that everything is going to fail. They said that the Superman movie last year was bad, even though it was great. And so now that there actually is a mediocre movie that actually did flop at the box office, that has further inflamed them. And I said there were two groups. There's a second group, and that's basically just the right-wing misogynist chuds. There's a lot of overlap between these two groups, but I don't want to unfairly paint all Snyder fans with that right-wing brush, as I've said before. I think there's a definite right-wing element to the Snyder fandom, but it's not all of them. And some of these right-wing misogynist types, they don't care. I mean, they're just trying to score a point. They're just trying to score points against liberals and nerds and all of that. They don't give a shit about superhero movies. When you've got relentless hate coming from two groups like that, it's the movie never really stood a chance. Even if it had been really good, which unfortunately it isn't. But if it had been really good, it still would have had a huge amount of hate against it. People decide months in advance, and I gotta ask you, how are you so confident in this opinion that the movie is trash when you haven't seen it? And people will be like, well, you don't need to see the movie to know it's trash. You can tell it's trash from the trailers. And it's like, okay, time is finite, life is short. You can't see every movie, and I totally get that. Actually, I have a friend. My friend Rory, who has the same name as me, I think he does see every movie. But I get it. If you see a trailer and you think it looks like it's not for you, you don't want to spend the time doing that, that's fine. Don't see the movie. That's great. But do not then devote all of this mental energy to hating something you haven't seen. I don't respect that. It's like, yes, you can conclude from a trailer that it's not worth your time, but then no, you can't then devote so much of your time and mental energy to hating it without I will not allow you to do that, because obviously I am in charge of the world and I can stop you. But the right-wing misogynist chud element obviously is the worst. And they're like, girls shouldn't be in action movies, and blah, blah, it's like, this is feminism gone mad. Obviously, fuck you, is the first response to that. And there were some chicks on Fox News talking about, well, I played with Barbies when I was a kid. I didn't like superheroes. I was like, shut up. Now there is a non-obnoxious version of that argument. The version of the argument is that, 90% of the fandom is male, and always has been. Now, shout out to all my geek girls out there. I know you do exist. Geek girls do exist and should be praised and valued. But it always has been it has always been a mostly male thing, and that's fine. But I think it's really sad that a male fandom cannot support female leads in things. And of course, they'll come back with saying, well, we people liked Wonder Woman because that Zack Snyder was still involved. He was actually minimally involved in Wonder Woman. So I love this. As long as we just care about being good, and that's fine. If you care about being good, obviously we should all care about things being good. But I do get really annoyed with this, you can't have a woman superhero, and how can she's just this little girl and she is kicking the asses of guys who are twice her size. Yeah, because she's from fucking Krypton. That's why. Because this is all a fantasy. If people are gonna be in real life, girls aren't as physically strong, females are not as physically strong as males are. It's like, wow, I'm really glad you're cracking that case wide open for us, with your knowledge of basic biology like that. I'm really impressed. It's a fantasy. People have superpowers in fantasies, not in real life. That's the point of a fantasy. I remember people used to get on my goat Buffy Summers, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, for that kind of thing too. And it's like, she has supernatural powers. That's why she can beat people up. It's not meant to be real life. Because she is the one girl who is chosen in all the world to do this. And where am I going with that? And also, I don't think. What is the value of the fantasy? And I think we can. That's probably something I'm going to explore in another video. But what is the benefit we get out of superhero fantasies? Is it just wow? What if we could fly and be really strong and the power fantasy element? Yes. But there's also the moral dimension to it, and the idea that you would use your strength to be a better person, try to make the world a better place. I think that's important. I think there should be a moral grounding to these things, which the movie has. But anyway, it is what it is. The movie's a box office flop. It's going to have a really, really bad effect on James Gunn's universe going forward. I'm sure. I mean, I'm still rooting for Gunn's universe, but I get that it's a steeper climb than maybe it would have been. And from the behind the scenes stuff that I've heard, sounds not great. Again, I think Gunn's a great writer and director. He didn't write or direct this movie. He did produce it, and I think that from what I've read behind the scenes, he maybe made some, bad producer moves, in my opinion. Like, maybe he didn't fully trust his team. He kind of took control over it the last minute. And that's kind of the sort of thing Kathleen Kennedy has done with the Star Wars movies, I think, to their detriment. Is kind of, producer's job is to, like, you pick your people, you trust your people to get the job done, and if you don't trust them, you never, that's on you. You never should have hired them in the first place. But something that the Snyder Bros like to say is, everything James Gunn does is just like Guardians of the Galaxy. This movie is just like Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's not. Beyond being in space and beyond, the needle drops are indeed a Gunn signature. Like, those two things are kind of Guardians-esque, but really it's more safe to say that they're riffing on the same kind of material. They're riffing on 80s sci-fi movies and 90s sci-fi movies, and Mad Max is in there, and The Fifth Element is in there. Aesthetically, I think it's more like Guardians and Supergirl are both drawing on those, and Thor Ragnarok really drew on, like, kind of the cheesier side of the 80s sci-fi genre, not the classic ones, kind of the bad ones. And I think that was the genius of Thor Ragnarok, was that it's actually a good movie that's kind of really inspired by bad movies. That would be the case here if it were better. I could probably go on and on about that, but, like, F the haters. And I am not a hater. I am a critic in this case, but not a hater, obviously, because I really wanted this to go well, and I guess that's the segue into my personal history with Supergirl. I am a fan. I am a fan of this character, and I feel like she doesn't have a whole lot of outspoken fans, but I have always been, Kara Zor-El has always been my girl. And this probably goes back to when I was a real little kid in the 80s. I loved the first two Christopher Reeve Superman films. I think even at that age, I knew that Superman 3 was pretty bad. Nobody had to tell me that. Superman 3 was not as good as the first two. Still had Christopher Reeve, though, and anything that has Christopher Reeve as Superman is at least partially redeemable. But Supergirl was a spin-off. They made a film in 1984 based on Supergirl. That is one thing we can say. There have been two feature films based on Supergirl, and this latter one is definitely the greatest Supergirl movie of all time, of those two. Because the 1984 movie is really bad. Even though, again, it has Helen Slater, who I think, as many people said, at least she manages to look not ridiculous in that costume, which is, something she shares with Reeve, and she was very good in the role. Script was really bad. Here's a funny bit of trivia. I found out the guy who wrote the screenplay to Supergirl in 1984 and Masters of the Universe in 1987, both really cheesy, like, kind of terrible, kind of fun cheese, but also really terrible. The same guy wrote both those screenplays, and I'd say he's I denounce him as a hack. He's probably he's probably in his 80s now. He's probably a nice old man if he's still alive. But he also wrote the script for The Dark Crystal, which I love. Which is unapologetically love that one. But anyway, that's true. And it's just funny that Masters of the Universe and Supergirl both came out with new movies this summer, and along with The Mandalorian. All three of them were kind of the big hot IPs, the big hot intellectual property blockbusters, and I think all of them were disappointments at the box office. Of the three, I think I liked Masters of the Universe the most, which might be surprising. Masters of the Universe actually, it actually seemed to have some things to say, which you don't always get from these kind of movies, and I really appreciated that. But yeah, unfortunately, they all thought, Spider-Man is probably going to do well. Everyone predicts that it's going to do well, but man, I don't know. It seems like the era of this movie being the era of this type of movie being automatically successful is behind us. I think they'll probably continue to make Batman and Spider-Man movies forever, but the days when Ant-Man gets his own trilogy are definitely behind us. But anyway, I was talking about my history with character. 1984, the movie really sucked, but here's the thing: Helen Slater was appealing to me as a 6-year-old boy because girls are soft and pretty and nice, and so I think the character had that kind of effect on me. Now I wasn't a comics reader at the time. I became a regular comic, at least not a regular comics reader. It was a few years later, about 1987. When I start reading comics, every week, and that is the era of the post-crisis. After an event called Crisis of the Infinite Earths, in which Supergirl was actually dramatically killed. There's a very famous cover of Superman holding up his cousin's dead body, and he's in agony and grief. But really, what happened after Crisis is not that she was killed. What happened after is that she retroactively never existed in the first place. I think they killed her because the movie bombed, which is mean. But then John Byrne came in, and this is a whole. I've discovered this is a whole controversy on the internet too. A lot of people really hate John Byrne, and he is kind of a. He's kind of a conservative dude politically, and so I understand why people, obviously I don't like people who are conservative politically, as has been covered in previous videos, but I do love John Byrne's Superman. Here's the thing. John Byrne came in, he made a lot of changes. He made Superman truly the last son of Krypton, so he got rid of the other Kryptonian characters, like Supergirl, like Krypto the dog, like Kandor the bottled city, like the villains of the Phantom Zone. And the idea was to make Superman totally unique. He stripped away all of that mythology, which characterized the previous era, the Silver Age. Actually the Bronze Age was whatever, shut up nerd. But here's the thing: at the exact same time I got into the newer comics of the time, the John Byrne comics, I started reading these old digests of the Silver Age Superman stories and Superboy and Supergirl stories, and I loved both. For me, it's like, do I like deep dish pizza or thin crust pizza? The answer is yes. I like it. I love it all. So I loved Byrne's take, and I love the Silver Age stuff. And for me, it's never been in conflict. There are people who really strongly prefer it one way or another, and I just love Superman, and I love Supergirl in the many forms that she takes, and she did take many forms. So there's no Supergirl at the time. Well, again, we're going to back up. I read all these Silver Age stories, loved the Supergirl who was introduced in 1959. She is very much like she is in the 1984 movie. She's this sweet, innocent, younger female version of Superman, and which is a characterization that has changed. But I really liked Kara Zor-El originally. I don't think the comics ever used her to her full potential, for a lot of reasons. I think the Superman editorial office was very isolated from the rest of the DC universe, and Supergirl, why was she not a member of the Teen Titans? She should have been a member of the Teen Titans from the beginning, or the Legion. Well, she was in the Legion of Superheroes, the Legion stuff was great with Supergirl and with Superboy, who was just the younger version of Superman. So I really like Supergirl. I don't know if she ever reached her full potential. There was a great early 80s, just before Crisis, Supergirl series that was actually set in Chicago, which I've read pretty recently through the magic of Hoopla. My plug for Hoopla, which is a website where you can read a lot of things, including comics, if you have a library membership. I do think Supergirl was great. Maybe never reached her full potential back then. And then after John Byrne, there is no more Supergirl. But there kind of is, because they introduced a parallel world. Supposedly Crisis destroyed all the parallel worlds, but John Byrne said, "Oh no, there's actually one more." So we got Supergirl from a Pocket Universe, who was actually, but she wasn't really Kryptonian. She was like a shape-shifting, a blob, basically a blob that could take on any shape that it wanted. And so that character was Supergirl for a while. They called her Matrix, but she had the appearance of the classic Supergirl, even though she's really a totally different character. And then Peter David, who's a really great writer, and this is in the 90s, Peter David took Matrix, who he decided had no personality, which is not true. But he decided, well, she's just this shape-shifting blob. I'm going to put the soul of an angel in this shape-shifting blob. And then we had Supergirl, who's an angel and a shape-shifting blob that's also crossed with this ordinary teenager named Linda, and that became the 90s Supergirl, which is actually a great series. It's probably the greatest Supergirl stories, even though they're not Kara Zor-El stories, is Peter David's 90s Supergirl, which is a lot like the aforementioned Buffy. It was like supernatural horror, but it was like this young heroine who was grappling with her flaws, and a great supporting cast, etc., etc. 90s Supergirl by Peter David, dope. Really liked that. Was really into that as a teenager. But then they finally decided around, I think, 2004. Jeff Loeb and an artist named Ed McGuinness decided to bring the classic Kara Zor-El back. So now, enough time had passed. It's okay for Superman to not be the last son of Krypton anymore. The original Supergirl basically comes back. They reintroduce her. And there's good and bad in the reintroduced Kara, because they made a couple of tweaks to her classic origin. One of which was that, the old version was that she was younger than Superman and she had grown up on Argo City, which is essentially this like asteroid that broke off from Krypton. When Krypton, of course, exploded, this little fragment of Krypton survived for a while, but then eventually it had a like containment dome or something that breaks and they all die, and Kara is sent as the sole survivor of that last remnant of Krypton. That was the original origin. This origin, they changed it slightly so that she's actually older than her cousin Kal-El. She's actually a teenager when he's a baby. So when they shoot him away in a rocket ship as a baby, she is sent to basically watch over him, to take care of him. But because of like a suspended animation thing, everything went wrong, so she wound up arriving like 30 years too late. So Superman is now a grown man, and she is still a teenager because she has been in suspended animation. So that's all fine and dandy. I think it adds a little bit of an element to the characterization of the two of them, their relationship, that I like. However, the thing about this depiction that was not great was that early 2000s art styles were like super sexist and super of course she has to be naked, and she has to, as soon as she's introduced, she's not wearing any clothes and she speaks in alien language, and it's kind of that whole trope of like, I'm from an advanced alien world and I am gorgeous, but I don't understand your primitive Earth concepts such as clothes and restraining one's immediate sexual impulses. So there's a lot of unfortunate sexism in the series that revived her. Side note: there's also the character of Power Girl, and Power Girl. If I were to explain Power Girl in 100 words or less, this is misleading, but it's also basically true. Power Girl is an alternate universe version of Supergirl, and the biggest difference between the two is she has bigger boobs, and that character was created in the late 70s, and is still around today. And yeah, I wish I were making that up, but that is basically who Power Girl is. So yeah, but I mean, apart from the sexism, there is a changed characterization that I largely like, and it's the more bitter, more misanthropic version of the character, which makes sense because unlike unlike Superman, she actually grew up on Krypton or Argo City or whatever it was. She actually grew up. And lost that civilization. She lost her home. She lost her family. Whereas Clark was raised by nice people, the Kents here on Earth, and he thinks of Earth as his primary home. At least post John Byrne he does, post Crisis he does, which I think is correct. He does think of Earth as his primary home. She thinks of Krypton as her primary home, and her primary home is gone. So that makes her a sadder, darker character. And of course there was the CW Supergirl TV series, where she was a little more sweet and light, even though they had this new origin. I thought it was a great show, though. I really like the CW Supergirl. I like Supergirl. I'm a fan. I may be one of the few, but I'm really a big Supergirl fan. I'm a big Kara Zor-El fan, as well as other versions of Supergirl. And so I was excited. I was really happy that there was going to be a new movie. So we're 25 minutes in. I'm sure nobody's watching, but I am doing this to hear myself talk. And Supergirl, the new Supergirl movie, now I'm going to get into it. It has that darker and bitter characterization, which is good, played by Millie Alcock, who is great. Millie Alcock is a terrific lead. The flaws that are in the movie are not on her at all. Because she plays the character really brilliantly. I think maybe what's most disappointing to me is that it is based on a very particular comic series, which is called Woman of Tomorrow, and it was a one-off graphic novel written by Tom King, drawn by somebody whose art I actually don't like. The art, it's a little too neoclassical for me, or something, but I do really like the book. I like the story, even though I could tell as soon as I started reading it a few years ago, this is almost wholly ripped off from Charles Portis's classic Western novel True Grit, which spawned not one but two classic film versions. There's one with John Wayne as in the role of Rooster Cogburn, and Kim Darby as Maddie Ross, who's the young girl looking to avenge the murder of her father. And then there's the Coen Brothers version, which has Jeff Bridges as Rooster Cogburn and Haley Stanfield as Maddie Ross. And both those movies are great. The book is great. I'm a big fan of True Grit. So, yes, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is ripped off from True Grit, but it's a case of stealing from the best. I have no problem with this. This is if this was an inspired idea to take the characterization and general plot of True Grit and make it into a superhero story, specifically a Supergirl story. Here's the disappointing thing is that I don't think the movie, while the movie follows the plot of Woman of Tomorrow, I just don't think it follows I don't think it has the juice. It doesn't have the wit that the comic has, because the dialogue in the comic is actually really funny, and even though the style is very much ripped off from True Grit, it's just really good. The character of Maddie Ross, who is Ruthie in the comic and movie Supergirl, is she is very precocious. She's a 14-year-old girl who loses her father. In the movie, they have the entire family murdered, which I think it's over the top. It's just throwing in more tragedy. I think I like it better when it's just her father who's killed. And she's just really determined to, she's going to go out and she is going to avenge her father's death. And the fact that she is a young girl doing this, I think that's the true grit of the title. She's really the main character, not Supergirl or Rooster Cogburn. But it's the way Ruthie is written in the comic. Again, completely ripped off from Maddie Ross and True Grit, but she is she's written like a very precocious, very wise beyond her years. The way she talks, she could be an old lady rather than a little girl, and I love that. It's just really funny. I think one of my favorite bits is I think she's on the kind of like intergalactic bus, and we see the bus in the movie, but it's just not nearly as good as the comic. Where like there's this like alien monster dude who is like sitting next to her, and I think he's encroaching on her seat, and she says, "Sir, could you please, not encroach on me, stick to your seat and don't try to take up my space." And the alien just says, "Small, tasty." He's basically implying that he's going to eat her. And she replies with, "Sir, neither my size nor my piquancy is relevant to the matter at hand." And so I love that character. In the movie, all of her wit, all of her worldliness, everything that makes her a unique character is taken away. And she's just kind of a normal little kid, like a normal 12-year-old or 14-year-old kid or whatever, and that's just boring. I mean, they made her British, and like, I don't know, why are they always British? I liked when she should be an Old West character, albeit a very upper-class and articulate one. You made her British and inarticulate. It's like the worst of all worlds. So I miss that from the comic. But even though, again, Millie Alcock's great, I think she has a great character arc. I think, as far as character goes, it's great stuff. Really like that David Corenswet Superman appears a few times, and we see the kind of the chemistry between those two is fantastic. The difference between Superman being like kind of this, he's the goody two shoes guy that he is, and Supergirl's she's more anti-authority. She's a punk. She's a rebel, and I love the mix of those personalities. So I think that's great. So the strongest recommendation for the movie is Millie Alcock, and then to a lesser extent David Corenswet, and then of course there's Jason Momoa as Lobo. He's a perfect Lobo. Lobo is he's one of the great 90s anti-heroes, but he was done with tongue-in-cheek. He was kind of making fun of the whole thing, created by the late great Keith Giffen. Love Keith Giffen, love Lobo. The movie does not integrate him into the plot as nearly as well as it could have. He really should have had a bigger part. I think it really should. And I think there's precedent for it, because the character of LaBeef in True Grit, I don't think really appears in the Woman of Tomorrow comic. But Lobo fills that niche really well. And so this really should have been Supergirl, Lobo, and Ruthie, a better Ruthie, and Crypto and their adventures. I think it would have made a better movie with more Lobo. As it stands, it feels like a glorified cameo. He's in and out, just a few scenes. Doesn't and so it doesn't live up to its potential. Which is a shame, because Momoa is so perfect in the part, and I really think Lobo is like. He's like the DC equivalent of like Deadpool. Deadpool's huge. Lobo could be that huge if he were done right. Is it an entertaining movie? Absolutely. I had fun watching it. I think it's fine, but it falls down in a lot of places. The villain is terrible. Krem is the character. This guy should be a henchman. Because he's not real villain material. And I think of the kind of movies that this movie is referencing, some better movies that this movie is referencing, kind of the cheesy classics of the 80s, the good cheesy classics like Highlander, like a villain he should be more of a villain like the Kurgan in Highlander, where he's just pure, unrelenting, vicious nastiness. That's what Krem should have been, and he's you're thug number 2. You're not the actual baddie. This movie doesn't have an actual baddie, and that's a shame. the fact that, and I don't remember if this is really an element of the comic, the fact that Krem turns out to be in charge of like a child trafficking operation or a woman sex slave trafficking operation, is obviously super relevant to our fucked up times. I don't think it's ever done in a way that, I don't think the movie really hits it as hard as it could. I don't think it hits the suffering of these victims. Not that I think it should like wallow in that stuff, but it was a potentially strong element that just didn't live up to its potential in the movie. But yeah, I think it's I think it's decent enough because of Alcock, because of Corin Sweat, and because of Momoa. 3 great performances that deserved a much better movie. And the fact that unfortunately it stumbles out of the gate, bad for the DC universe. I wish I didn't have to care about box office and shit, because like you shouldn't care. Back in the day, a movie was allowed to have legs, and could grow its audience. These days, you're either an instant hit or you're done, and that's and because of streaming and all that, and the industry has changed so much. If this movie had come out 10 years ago, it would have been a huge hit. And I think I've seen it compared to like the first Thor a few times, and I think that's about I think the first Thor is fine. I think it's good. It does what it needs to do, and so does Supergirl. Although or the first Ant-Man, the first Doctor Strange, I think they kind of fit with it kind of fits in that mold. It fits in the mold of good but not great, and unfortunately it kind of needed to be great. I think it integrates flashbacks really well. Kind of her origin is kind of told in flashback, which is kind of the Batman Begins style. Man of Steel did this as well. I don't think Man of Steel or Supergirl do it quite as well as Batman Begins, because very few things are as good as Batman Begins. But we get to see the sadness of growing up on Krypton and losing it. It's in there. Again, that element, a lot of this could have been better. Mostly the verdict on this is like it's decent, it's pretty good, could have been better. What are you gonna do? I love Millie Alcock as Supergirl. I want to see more of her. She's going to be in Man of Tomorrow next year. I saw somebody say that they think they're going to kill her in Man of Tomorrow. They better not. I really don't want that to happen, because I think I hope the DC universe gets over this stumble, and I would love to have a Supergirl sequel. I don't think we will, but I do want to see more of her. Even if it's just in supporting roles. And I don't know, it's not quite 40 minutes. It could have been shorter. Could have been like Supergirl itself. Could have been better. But I'm gonna end it. I have the power to end it now, to make it shorter, and that's a good thing.